Great. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah McSimmons. I'm a communications specialist with Farm and Food Care Saskatchewan. We are a group that tries to have engaging conversations with consumers by helping our members in the agriculture industry speak up about what it is that they do and to increase public trust and transparency in the food production industry in Canada. So we have other programs that you can take a look at, other webinars and other workshops, such as our Speak Up training, our media training, and our farm tour training workshop. These are all available on our website if you'd like to have a look. We also give general presentations to groups looking to build public trust in their specific sectors. So this is the third and final webinar in our Talking Agriculture series with Michele Payn. So if you missed the first two, it was Talking Today's Agriculture or Talking Animal Agriculture. And you can catch up on the Farm and Food Care YouTube channel or find the links on our website at farmfoodcaresk.org, and it's under the Resources tab. So there's a question box in the corner of your screen, and you can use that to interact with us throughout the webinar. Someone pointed out last time that if you enter full screen mode, that you might lose that question box, so something to be aware of. But other than that, I'll pass it over to Michele to go on to our Talking Crops webinar for today.
Well, hello from central United States, everyone. This is Michele Payn. I am from Indiana, and unfortunately, we are having quite a thunderstorm here today, so I'm just hoping my internet in rural America holds up. It's not the strongest to start with, and we are having a lot of lightning and thunder. So if you hear background noise in my office, that's what it is. But I'm truly excited to be here today to wrap up this Talking Agriculture series for Farm and Food Care, and also had a lot of fun being at the conference in December with everyone there. So if you were there, hopefully we are already connected on social media, and if not, I would invite for you to do so. My handles will be up at the end. The perspective that I bring to this is as a lifelong farm girl. I was born and bred in the dairy business in Michigan and have spent my entire career working in agriculture, including the last 17, nearly 18 years now, working as a professional speaker and an author. I have two books, No More Food Fights, which was released, I think, 4 years ago, and Food Truths from Farm to Table, which is what a lot of this work is based off of, and that was released just 1 year ago. So today we are going to be discussing talking crops, and by way of reference, I would point you to the handout section on your toolbar over there to the right or wherever you have it. The 25 food truths, which we'll be going through a few of them today. The graphic is available for your download, as is the action plan for translating farm to food, which I've referred to in each of the 3 webinars, and we will be reviewing in further detail today. So the other thing that I would ask, and I know this is unusual in a webinar, but I am perfectly comfortable taking questions throughout, and I really love having the interaction and knowing who's on here. So feel free to post anything in the questions box, and I will try to make sure that we get to it as we can, and then we'll have a couple of polls to keep it interactive and whatnot. When you think about talking crops, and this is true whether you're growing corn down here in the States or whether you're growing canola in Canada or some of the pulse crops, there's a tremendous amount of challenges and a lot of misunderstanding about what's happening. And we all spend a great deal of time talking about the technical aspects of our business, but this is a slide that I've shared before and I wanted to put up again today as we conclude the webinar series, because ultimately at the end of the day, talking agriculture, and I do mean all of agriculture, the greatest challenge that we all have to realize is that the data is not what people are after. And when we puke data on people's shoes, they turn away. When we spout science, they turn away. But when we connect with hearts, they will turn towards us. And so one of the greatest challenges that I would offer to you, particularly if you are heavy on the agronomy side, if you're a PAS, if you're heavy on the science side, is to perhaps put some of that aside and pull out your humanness first. I think this quote sums it up beautifully. People will forget the perfect soundbite that you are trained to give. People will forget exactly how you farm, but people will never forget the way that you make them feel. And in today's times in agriculture, we all understand that perhaps there's a different value system, as some allude to. We understand that we don't necessarily speak the same language. And I firmly believe that if we could simply help people feel better about their food choices, that we would have an opportunity to grow the conversation and have a richer, deeper conversation. I had mentioned the action plan that you can download in the handout section of the webinar, and this is the summary of what we have focused all of these webinars on, and my hope is that you will employ these 6 steps at home and really decide who it is that you can make an impact with, and then spend some time understanding what their passion is, what I call a hot button, what it is that really excites them, what gets them going. And it's not necessarily related to agriculture, farming, or food. Again, that's about connecting at the human level is what the second question is, and answering the what. And then the why is really being able to help them understand why agriculture matters through leveraging those hot buttons. And we have several different issues today that I'm going to share some specific stories and examples with to try to help you see different ways to help people understand why agriculture matters. I do want to offer a word of caution. I am not particularly in favor of a specific soundbite. I'm not here to tell you that I have all of the answers. I simply have found some different things that have worked through my speaking and writing over the last many years. But the one thing that I do want you to consider doing is investing time on a regular basis. I know that you're all busy people, but if we were to proactively invest in growing the conversation through this action plan, 15 minutes a day, whether that's when you're on auto steer and you're bored in the field, whether it's in winter, when you're flying down to Hawaii, or when it's your busiest season during planting and harvest. And in all seriousness, we do need to look at doing this on a regular basis so that it doesn't seem so overwhelming, and most importantly, so we can respond proactively instead of reactively. And then finally, it's about looking at the big picture and acting local. Big picture is where I would hope most agriculturists spend their time. Unfortunately, I don't see that a whole lot. I see a lot of people looking out for their own specific interests. And I want to encourage you all to consider the trust factor and big picture of agriculture, not just in your own arena. And then finally, the how is being able to really commit to a plan. And again, this is personal. This is not designed to be a corporate plan. It is designed for you to be able to take home and employ, and hopefully remember very easily through the who, what, why, when, where, and how. And today, as we have done in the webinar, other webinars, we are going to be addressing some of the specific food truths. These are the 25 food truths that are included in my book, Food Truths from Farm to Table. And the book is specifically consumer focused, but I actually interviewed 55 different contributors, including farmers, both in the States and Canada, ranchers, veterinarians, dietitians, doctors, and the like, and incorporated their stories about specific practices, about why we do what we do in agriculture. And what I learned through that exercise of writing 100,000 words is that we have to be able to translate the science of agriculture through story. And that is particularly true when we come down to some of the issues that are around talking crops. So the food truths that we're going to cover today are number 5, organic versus conventional, and you can see the food truth there is that organic farming is about production methods, not nutritional value. Chemicals. I know chemicals are a hot button issue for many consumers, and certainly something that, as I did my research and sat around kitchen tables with other mothers, that was brought up consistently, and I'm sure those are chemicals that you probably are getting ready to put on the fields here if we're lucky in the next month or so. And then number 10, we've talked about in each of the webinars. We're going to address it again today. Genes are the coolest ingredient on your plate. I truly believe that is the case, whether it's on the crop side of the business or on the animal side of the business. And we'll spend some time discussing GMOs, which is at the heart of that particular food truth. But you'll notice that that food truth is not meant to be contentious, and I worded it because I really do believe genes are cool. But I also worded it so that it would be more digestible, if you will, to those outside of agriculture. We'll also touch on sustainability, the complexity of that, and the fact that family business is a part of sustainability. And we will be discussing that soil is a farm's greatest asset and talking about some of the specifics around that. And I think just as a way of sharing an example, when you step back and you look at soil, it's an amazing tool that we have, and it really is the greatest asset, because whether you're on the crop side of the business and you're growing products every year in the soil, or whether you're on the animal side of the business and you, like I do, you rely on your pasture, I think we all know that it's incredibly important to take care of soil. However, there are many misperceptions about what farmers are doing to soil to harm it. And I know that we have people on the webinar that have vastly different practices, and I am not here to advocate for cover crops, fertilizers, GMOs, organic, or anything. I'm here to advocate for choice, but also helping people understand the complexity of soil. I think it's fascinating when you step back and you ask people what stores 10% of the world's carbon dioxide. Most people don't know that it's soil. We do, because of the fact that we work with it every day. And I think the fact that we lose 50,000 square kilometers of topsoil every year to water and wind erosion is a shocking fact. And that's a fact that impacts not only farmers, but really everybody across the spectrum. So being able to help people understand some of those tidbits about why we do what we do, and then also that we do value assets like our soil are really important. And number 22 is the last food truth that we will be covering kind of as a general overarching theme of this particular webinar. Choice on the farm and choice on the plate involve a balancing act. And I believe very strongly in this food truth. It's only number 22 because that's where it fell in the book. I believe that farmers have a right to choose to farm as they best see fit, and I also believe that consumers have a right to choose their food as they best see fit for their family. And sometimes those choices don't work in concert, but rather than condemning each other, what I try to advocate for is making the right choice for your family, whether it's on the farm or whether it's in the food aisle. So we have a poll coming up here, and what I would like to know is who is it that you think needs to learn about crops, and what specific target audience will you work on as part of your effort? So Sarah, if you want to go ahead and put the poll up here. And specifically, will you be working with students, legislators, consumers, media, or other? And if you have a focus on other, please type that in the questions box over on the right. So we have teachers here, good, was added on. And it looks like many people will be focusing on consumers. Some will focus on media, which I'm delighted to hear. And I'm trying to read here. Family, good. My city cousins, excellent. Okay, so we'll talk about extended family as everybody is completing the poll that's up on the screen here. It looks like we have fairly good feedback. A couple of folks have listed family and extended family. I would encourage you as a litmus test as to how important this conversation is to talk about crops. At your next extended family gathering, see how people feel about where their food comes from. Just ask them that question and how they feel about chemicals, how they feel about GMOs. Just promise me you won't throw food. Because many people believe that if some of your family grew up on the farm, they still have that as a reference point. And unfortunately, that is typically not true. Sometimes they need to have the context as to why we have the practices that we do. So the results of the webinar or the poll are 64% are going to be focusing on consumers, which is great, but I would urge you to be a bit more specific. Are you going to focus on moms? Are you going to focus on dads? Are you going to focus on a particular age segment? Are you going to focus on a particular demographic set? Because the more that you can understand about that group, the more that you will understand their hot buttons and be able to identify those and speak the same language. Then the next group is students, and again, I would urge you to specify what type of students you'll be working with. Is it the K through 6 or the 6 through 12 or the college students, because they have very different hot buttons as well. And then it looks like we had legislators and media tied. I'm obviously not Canadian, and Americans can appreciate this comment that are on the webinar that many of our elected officials perhaps do not understand agriculture, and I'm going to assume the same is true in Canada, rather, based upon what friends have told me up there. So glad to see that you are focusing on those. Just by way of a reference point, media was one of the lowest ones, and I'm not surprised because we all know that agriculture isn't necessarily real keen on talking to the media and being misquoted and worried about being made to look as though they're ignorant. But one of the challenges that I think we have to consider is that the International Food Information Council has done a study over the years that clearly shows that one of the reasons why media does not report in agriculture, and it is the #1 reason, in fact, is because they cannot find experts to talk about agriculture. They have no problem finding the folks on the other side, but finding expertise in agriculture is a bit of a challenge for them. So I will let that one sit for you all, and you can consider that, but I would encourage you to consider being able to look at what you can do with the media potentially as a target audience. So thanks everyone for participating in that, and then we will move on, and this is something that I have again put in each of the webinars, but I wanted to reiterate that what I have found through writing Food Truths is that if we can illustrate why food is raised the right way by the right people for the right reasons, we have an opportunity to have a very different conversation. And that is true regardless of whether you're focusing on a second grader or whether you're focusing on an elected official. And the reality is that we have to understand that this is not just about the farm side of the plate, it's also about the food side of the plate. And just as we've already talked about, the data, the facts, the science don't resonate with people until you have earned that right through heart work, through connecting on an emotional level and being able to understand that it is truly an intersection of our interest and their interest. And so one of the things that we need to do a better job of is stepping back and looking at all of agriculture. And one of the questions that I ask when I speak to live audiences is, what's the perfect image of agriculture? And the question that we have today before us is, who are the right people? And many of you may have different images coming to mind. This is what I know to be true. There is no particular way to farm that is right. And whether you are an organic farmer with 60 acres or a conventional farmer with 6,000 acres, that is true. And it is also true whether you're raising lentils or whether you have beef cattle. The right image for agriculture is the image that comes from firsthand experience. And talking about crops has to be about building trust that people have around food. And so you can see that food truth #5 is around organic farming. And organic farming is a production method. It is a choice for some families. And I would urge you to not necessarily think that you need to publicly condemn that, because if you are destroying trust in one type of farming, the same is true if you're an organic farmer and you're condemning biotechnology or large farms, you are destroying trust in farming. And so one of the things that I always try to get people to do is to step back and think of the big picture agriculture. And trust is one of those factors that we still have on our side. People trust farmers, but they don't trust farming, according to the Illinois Farm Family Study from a few years ago. The difference between a farmer and farming is that one is a person and the other is a practice. The trust is not there in farming because it's a practice and it's unknown. Some studies have shown that 75% of consumers haven't been on a farm or ranch in the last 5 years. That actually came out of Michigan, so not too far from the folks that are on Ontario there. And I think when you consider that we're multiple generations removed from the farm and we have people who haven't been on a farm, well, of course they're not going to trust farming because they don't understand it. And that is particularly true if we don't talk about it. So one of the big questions and one of the big needs around this webinar was organic versus conventional. I have a friend, Ryan Weeks, who's actually out of Nebraska, farms several thousand acres. Very modern farmer. He is also an organic farmer. He's actually been going through his organic certification for the last few years, and it is extraordinarily challenging for him. But there is a market for both types of crops. And again, it's a choice for the family. And I think it's interesting when you step back here in the States. I know that organic is actually monitored by the USDA marketing department. It is not meant to be a seal of food being superior in a nutritional way, food being superior in a farming way. It is simply a seal, and it is one that obviously has a lot of market. But I think when you step back, in Food Truths from Farm to Table, I had numerous examples from studies, dietitians, and research, as well as stories from farmers that farm both organically and conventionally, that it is not, organic food is not necessarily nutritionally superior. It's not necessarily superior in flavor. It is a preference. So I just want to encourage you all to think about it as you consider the right people in agriculture. Are the right people always farming one singular type of way? And likewise, are the right people who are buying food only buying one type of label? I think not, and I think that's a challenge that we have to accept, is that building trust in agriculture, building trust in farming has to be across all types of farming rather than an us versus them, because again, it's about choice. And then that brings us to the right way. And I put an image up here when you, and this is actually a Canadian image here, when you look at this and you consider that you're in farming, you're in agriculture, you probably see modern equipment, you see a pretty nice crop, you see some grain bins in the background, and you think that it looks like fairly normal circumstances. And so yes, of course, this is the right way. It's modern agriculture, is the way it's supposed to be, right? Well, the perspective that I would encourage you to take a look at is what the perspective is across the plate. So you can see that I pulled this from Mother Earth News. Mother Earth News. That was a Freudian slip. And it talked about the threats of GMOs and that there's serious threat to humans and so forth and so on. What perspective do consumers get? Because that's the perspective you need to be thinking about in talking about crops. So the perspective that consumers probably get, from what I've heard, actually from friends that live around cornfields and bean fields where I'm at here in central Indiana, is they see that sprayer. So you look at the sprayer right above Mother Earth News and you think, okay, modern sprayer, they're out there spraying crops, looks perfectly fine to me. Well, what consumers see are chemicals. And what they see is a product that could harm their family. And they don't understand that it's majority water. They also don't understand that they're made of chemicals. So how is it that we can have images like that out there about modern agriculture without providing the context about what the right way is? And we'll be talking a lot more about that a little bit later in the webinar. So that brings us to, what are the right reasons? And I think when you consider the right reasons, first off, to have a conversation, the right reason is curiosity. To get to know the other person, to have mutual respect. It's not about shoving your viewpoint or trying to persuade them to your way of thinking. Because again, when it comes to food, everyone has a choice of how they're going to feed their family. And that is true whether it's in the organic or conventional conversation, whether it's about chemicals, soil, GMOs, sustainability, whether it's about food labels. And I can tell you that one of the things I get more than a little frustrated with is food labels, and that wasn't a food truth that we're going to spend a lot of time on today. But when you consider the fact that you can go to the grocery store, and at least here in the States, and I've seen some of it in Canada, and you can buy GMO-free, organic, gluten-free, natural, farm fresh kitty litter. I have a bit of a problem with that, because why do we need to have a food label that tells us what is in kitty litter? Likewise, why do we need a food label on water that says it's GMO free? So there's a lot of challenges about what is happening in the food store today. And I would encourage you to spend your time focusing on the right reasons around farming and why we do what we do. Because if more people understood why we're employing the practices that we do in farming and in agriculture, I think we would have a radically different conversation. So we have another poll here. I'm curious as to what you think are the highest priority issues in crop agriculture for you to talk about. Is it chemicals, the organic versus conventional debate, sustainability, GMOs, or other? And again, if you answer others, if you could please put your answer in the question box, that would be great. Those are popping up and I can see them there. And it's coming in, okay. All right, so chemicals are coming up here. GMOs, interesting. And it looks like we have a lot of the answers in, so if you want to go ahead and wrap it up. And again, if there's any other issues that feel really need to be given priority, other ag destroying water, which fits under sustainability. Okay, so we had a couple comments here about chemicals and that GMO gets all the attention, and then water. I would say that chemicals is already covered. We'll be discussing that. And then safe, affordable food, which we will talk about a bit as we discuss some of these different issues as well. So you can see the poll results came in. GMOs by far and away received the highest votes as far as the issues that you want to talk about. Sustainability, which I would put air, water, environment under all of that. Organic and conventional, and chemicals. And I would agree that chemicals is a high priority because we have a challenge with a lot of folks not understanding that fact that chemicals are used and are produced naturally in plants and why they are in there. So, okay, we will move on. Thank you for responding to that poll. All right, so to talk about chemicals, this is a huge challenge in a scientifically illiterate society, which is the way that I would describe our society today. When you look at numerous studies that show that people clearly don't understand that there are chemicals in their food, hormones in their food, and they don't understand exactly what is happening in the science of their own life, much less in food, it's a bit of a challenge. So one of the things that I would suggest that you do is to be prepared to discuss basic chemistry. Do people know that they're comprised of 6 basic chemical elements? And if they don't, you probably need to help them understand that in a non-threatening way. But I think it's also important that as we have that conversation with people, that we're prepared to discuss the protocol that are in place to protect food. Now, that's a very scientific sounding thing that I would only offer to an agriculture audience, not to a consumer audience. But when you consider what's in place as to how you use your products, the restrictions in which you use your products, and the withdrawal time that is required before any product is allowed in the food system, if you can bring those to light to consumers, it's an opportunity to help them understand why their food is safe. And I think it's also interesting if you can share stories around bacterium and food safety. That's particularly true in the fruit and vegetable aisle, not so much necessarily in the grains, somewhat true in some of the pulses. But the biggest thing that I would challenge all of you to emphasize, and that's why I had to put 2 S's on it apparently there, is why do we use chemicals? And being able to relate that to their world. So on every issue covered in Food Truths and throughout these Talking Agriculture webinars, why do we do what we do? And many of you are saying, well, it's logical. Of course, we use chemicals. We have to in order to protect the crops, in order to make money, in order to grow the best crops, and so forth. Okay, I understand that, but the question is for Joe consumer and Susie consumer, why are you out there with those huge sprayers in a field pouring chemicals on their crops? And relating it to their world can look a lot of different ways. One would be to help them understand, again, basic chemistry. A second would be to help people understand that plants do, in fact, produce their own insecticides and pesticides, and they do produce chemicals. But more importantly, to be able to relate it to a world that the consumer can understand. And that world typically has to do with gardening, and it has to do with being able to raise flowers and tomatoes perhaps on their patio. So one of the ways that I do it is I'll just say, hey, have you ever raised any tomatoes? And the response is usually, yeah, it's gross because those white bugs come. I say, yeah, they sure do. Those are called aphids. And can you imagine having an entire field that you didn't spray filled with bugs? And a lot of people understand immediately then why it's necessary. And then I will try to share with them once I've had that personal conversation and related to them as a mom, as a fellow sports fan, whatever the case may be. would be to share some facts with them that in each field there's 30,000 weeds, there's 3,000 species of nematodes, which is a really scary sounding thing, and there's 10,000 species of bugs that eat plants. In other words, they're going to eat the food that's out there, just like they eat the flowers, they eat the tomatoes on your patio. And then people start understanding on a common sense level, if you can get them there, that perhaps there are reasons why we do this. The other thing that you can point to, and we'll talk a little bit about this in sustainability, is food waste. 40% of our food is thrown out, is trash, is wasted. 40%. And a lot of it is because people don't want to eat anything less than the perfect produce. And so how can we produce food that's going to be consumed, that's safe, that is not trashed and contributes to food waste? And chemicals is a part of that. And one of the things that people seem to really like is if you can pull out exactly some of the different products, like mums that produce their own pesticides and others that do some things. I mean, plants truly are survival of the fittest. We all know that, but it's a matter of being able to tell the stories that are fun around the cool things that plants do. Okay, and that brings us to GMO, everybody's favorite topic, right? A little sarcasm there. I would encourage the first thing that you do with GMO is A, don't lead the conversation with GMO. It's incredibly contentious, it's very emotional, and B, never use hashtag GMO if you're on Twitter especially, but throughout social media, because you will get all sorts of pushback from some of the activist community if you do that. So when you consider GMOs, and if you are a fan of GMOs, great, and if you're not, that's perfectly fine too. I do think it's important that we all are prepared to have a conversation about GMO and why it's used. And it's not about reducing pesticide usage. It's not about all the benefits that it gives farmers or folks in agribusiness, and it has to be about consumers and what it benefits consumers. So one of the most effective ways that I have found to discuss GMOs is, and I use this with dietitian groups that I talk to quite a bit, when I have people approach me afterwards, I'll just simply ask, hey, do you have anyone who's diabetic in your life? And many people do, and I'll just simply say, well, my daughter's godfather is severely diabetic. He probably wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for GMO, because you see, insulin is derived from a GMO process with bacteria. And that immediately raises the question mark in people's head about the value on a personal level, on a medical level, on a health level about GMOs. And it somewhat takes it off of emotional center. And I never talked about agriculture, I never talked about farming in that. And what it does do is allow people to kind of go, huh, and gives them a bit of breathing space, because GMO is so contentious and we are so incredibly opinionated around it that it's hard to have a conversation if we can't step back and talk about things like insulin, or the fact that genes really are the coolest ingredient on your plate. And that's not only true on the crop side of the business, it's true on the animal side of the business. But I would encourage you to think about why that food truth is true. Why are genes the coolest ingredient on your plate? And don't go into, well, seedless grapes are GMO. They're not, actually. And we've been doing GMOs for decades. Well, no, we've not. We've been doing selective breeding, and there is a distinct difference. But I would encourage you to think about why we are using the practices that we do. One of the practices that I offer between the conventional versus organic, as well as the GMO discussion, is BT. BT corn is heavily used in my neck of the woods, and BT is also used as a pesticide in organic apples, but it is not included as a pesticide that is approved for organic corn. And it's interesting because much of the organic community seems to be anti-BT when it is used to produce corn that is naturally resistant to rootworm. And so I think if we can have transparent discussions about some of the practices that we have, and that no, we're not sticking needles in food, and I believe there's 13 now, maybe that number's wrong, don't quote me on that, but there are a very limited number of GMO approved products here in the States and even fewer in Canada. And the reality is there are reasons that GMO can offer benefits, such as insulin, such as saving the papaya crop in Hawaii. And the stories that we can build around genetics are amazing. One of the things that I found when I wrote Food Truths was that the first biotechnology actually happened naturally many years ago, centuries ago in Asia. And it actually was a sweet potato that benefited from a bacterium. Soil was the engineer, and a bacterium passed on a trait to a sweet potato, and as a result, the sweet potato became genetically modified. And so I think it's amazing when you look at that story, or the papaya story, or the rootworm story, or the insulin story, to consider the choices that families make in farming, whether you use GMO or whether you're against GMO, that's fine. Or you look at a product such as canola and you consider the fact that it's obviously a GMO and why it's out there, is to help people understand your story and why you have made that choice for your family on the farm, in the grocery store, or wherever it may be, to build a story around your choice, to help people understand that you're trying to do the best thing you can for your family as well. And that brings us to sustainability, one of the most complex topics, a topic that includes water, it includes air, it includes the land, it includes the environment. And I think it's important for you to consider what your own definition is of sustainability. When I wrote the book, I found at least 100 different definitions, and I pretty much gave up finding one that would make everyone happy. But I do believe that sustainability has to be about including the survival of multi-generation family businesses. And I found that most consumers would agree with that statement. And I think it's also important that as part of a family business, why is sustainability important to you? And this is not where you get to talk about the science. It's not where you get to pull out your agronomic sheets and where you get to show all of the data that you have. It's where you talk about the fact that you are looking at what's best for your family and what is best for your farm and what you're trying to take care of. And most farmers I know are always trying to take care of their family, and they're always trying to take care of their soil. And so what sustainable practices do you use? And the most importantly is why you use them. And that is a challenge for many of us to be able to talk about, because you do want to pull out the data. Well, you use the practices that you do because you feel it's the best choice for your family. Why? And why, for example, do you use cover crops, or why do you choose no-till, or why do you choose conventional till, or why do you choose biotechnology? What is the sustainability practice? But more importantly, why do you use it? And one of the things that I think we do a really poor job of is talking about the stories around the economic impact of our farms, of our agribusinesses in a community. And the fact that many of us have farmed for generations, and when you consider the economic contributions, some studies have shown that one farm typically contributes $100,000 plus to the local community, and other communities it's substantially more. How many checks do you write in your community? How many employees do you have? I know that you're sensitive about sharing your financial information. I'm not suggesting that you do that, but I do suggest that you build stories around that. And when you look at the opportunity around sustainability, it's obviously a huge hot button issue for many consumers. And as such, I believe it's a real opportunity for us to make some inroads on talking with folks about why sustainability is equally as important for us in the agricultural community. And I provided several examples of different farmers doing just that throughout the book. So, and I do see we have a question. I'm going to get to that one in a little bit. I didn't want you to think that I'm ignoring it. So when you look at the opportunity to talk about whether it's these three issues, whether it's organic versus conventional, whether it's animal agriculture, again, I'm asking you for 15 minutes a day. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can create memes like I did around the one for soil. You can be on Instagram, such as Ag More Than Ever. And you look at these photos and you think, well, what do flowers, cute little girls, and sheep have to do with me? Well, here's what it has to do with you. That middle photo had 560 some likes on it, the little girl mixing up the milk replacer. And you may not have a cute little girl, but when you consider what that image does, is it provides the human connection around agriculture. It makes farming seem human. Particularly if you provide a caption on Instagram, which takes less than a couple minutes to type out, and I know you've got great photos of your equipment, your practices, your plants, your products on your phone there. You take a couple minutes and you post it on Instagram and you type up why that photo should matter to anyone. And you get to leave an impression about why farming is more human. That video that's in the center is actually a new video, or new movie rather, documentary that's coming out from a chef up in Canada, Before the Plate. I've seen the trailer on it. That is the YouTube screen for the trailer. You can see the social connections there. I would encourage you to look it up. It's pretty interesting, and I know they are working with some different agriculture organizations to help make that happen. And another opportunity would be shaking hands in your church parking lot. It would be having a conversation on that parking lot when you go to the pub, wherever it may be. It's about being able to have a conversation, whether it would be about crops, your family, all of agriculture. And remember that for the Canadian listeners, you know, in 1931, 1 in 3 Canadians lived on a farm, and today it's substantially less than that. 1 in 46, it may be 1 in 50 by now. And the opportunity that we have to reach different target audiences, as we had talked about at the beginning, is substantial. One of the things that I have done is targeted dietitians and chefs, as well as the healthcare arena. And so sometimes it makes sense for you to get onto a podcast and have a conversation with these people about what's really happening on the farm, just as I did with Chef Vivian Howard, who apparently is rather prevalent through a lot of different TV stations. I'll be honest and tell you, I'd never heard of her before I was invited to be on the podcast, but we had a great conversation, and she was wowed by everything that's happening on the farm. And it was just the basic conversations about some of the most basic principles. So to get to one of the questions, a question that is challenging to answer is, why do so many advocacy organizations report negative health and environmental impacts from chemicals in agriculture if what the ag industry is saying their products are safe? Well, without knowing exactly which organizations, and even if I did, I can't tell you why people choose to report negative health environmental impacts. I can tell you that it is important for you to do your own research and come up with your own conclusion, and be able to distill it and synthesize it in a way that makes sense to the consumer, because the consumers are being bombarded constantly for anybody who's on social media. You've seen these numbers before. This is my research. They're being updated this week, so they won't be out of date anymore. But the reality that we have to understand is that there are numerous activist organizations, whether it's on the animal side, like the Humane Society having 100-fold growth on Twitter, whether it's on the environmental side, such as the Sierra Club having a 75-fold growth on Instagram, or everything in between. The reality that we have to face is that people are out there talking on social media about farming practices. And if our voices are not in the conversation, we lose the opportunity to be proactive. We lose the opportunity to not be defensive. And if you're out there providing photos and the why we do what we do in agriculture, then we win, because it at least creates a question mark in people's minds, and it helps them understand that food is raised the right way by the right people for the right reasons. And at the end of the day, I would encourage you all to remember that this is very much about a bottom line impact. It's not about public relations fluff. If you value your right to farm as you best see fit, and if you believe that you have the right to make choices on your farm, then I would strongly suggest that you perhaps spend some time thinking about how you can grow the conversation through a specific target audience. Find out what their hot buttons truly are, not what you think they should be, but what are their points of passion, what really excites them. And then spend some time through translating science through story, connecting with those hot buttons and answering the question why agriculture matters. Do so proactively, big picture, and using a plan that works. So that is pretty much wrapping up. If you have any questions, feel free to post them here. I'm trying to scroll down. And if you were with us in December at the Farm and Food Care Conference, you saw this quote. I went ahead and put it on the screen because I really believe strongly in it. It's a proverb I actually found in Iowa on a hotel room wall, but I put it in all my presentations because I just love it. If you want 1 year of prosperity, you can grow grain. If you want a decade of prosperity, you can grow trees. But if you want a lifetime of prosperity, it's about growing people. I don't care what type of crop or what type of animal you are growing to feed people. At the end of the day, agriculture needs to be about growing people, and that's not through the food that they eat, but that's through the people on the farm side of the plate and being able to help connect those people on a human level. So that is everything that I had for our Talking Crops webinar today. If you have any questions, please post them in the box. And I also want to point out, while we're waiting for any questions to come in, that if you are interested in either of my books, they are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Target in the States. I'm assuming that is true in Canada. I know that you can get them up there because there's many people who have. You're welcome to order them through my website, but international shipping is cost prohibitive, so I wouldn't suggest it. But I'd be glad to connect with you on any social media channels. Please make sure that you take a note of those if you would like to do that. And then finally, if you're interested in any of these 3 Talking Agriculture series, including the one that was Talking Modern Agriculture, the first one, or talking about animal agriculture, the second one, you can find those at farmfoodcaresaskatchewan.org. And oh, thank you, Penny. I appreciated your kind comments and being able to give you a hands-on tip. It is very much my goal to give you some tips that you can take home and use immediately. The action plan works. I've seen a number of farmers and agribusinesses use it, as well as use it myself. I would encourage you to download it. And those food truths, I can also tell you, work as far as opening up a different type of conversation, which is, I think, what so many of us need to have in agriculture. And with that, Sarah, I will turn it back over to you. I'm not seeing any other questions unless I missed one.
No, I think you got them all. So thank you, Michelle. That was a great wrap up to our 3-part series on Talking Agriculture. If you had missed any of them, as Michelle said, they're on the Farm Food Care website under the resource tab and webinars, or you can find them on the YouTube channel. So if that's everything for today, thank you all for coming.